Aw yeah, today we are going to look at some of the most common pronunciation errors in English and help you to correct them so that you can speak clearly and confidently. And of course, we'll keep it fun with some of your favorite TV series. And by the way, if you're new here, every week we make fun lessons just like this one so that you can understand fast-speaking natives without getting lost, without missing the jokes, and without subtitles. Like Zainab, who says that our lessons have helped her to improve her English pronunciation and learn vocabulary quickly. So if you want to do that too, it's really simple. Hit that subscribe button and the bell down below so you don't miss any of our new lessons. Now let's get those muscles of articulation ready and improve our pronunciation in English. Alright, so we're going to look at this through the lens of tendencies that learners usually find difficult, and we will give you some of the most commonly mispronounced words. So if you're like most learners in school, you probably mainly learned by reading, and this probably gave you some bad habits when it comes to pronunciation, because nowadays when you're trying to figure out how to pronounce a word, you will probably look at how it's spelled and try to figure it out. But if you do this, then most of the times you're going to be wrong. Now what you need to do is learn to trust your ears over your eyes. So while you're watching today's lesson, I want you to start trying to break this bad habit that you have of using your eyes over your ears, of reading, trying to figure out the pronunciation. So let's get our ears ready and take a look at the first tendency, the OUGH nightmare. Now, OUGH is often cited as an example of sound spelling discrepancy because it's one that learners get tricked up by all the time. And this is because it can be pronounced like O as in go, U as in mood, as in luck, or O as in horse. You know, English can be weird. It can be understood through tough, thorough thought though. So this is a perfect example of why English pronunciation is so tricky. The same spelling and 5 different sounds. Let's take a look. Though, like although. The phone's great, but isn't it too expensive though? Thought, which is the past of think. I thought it was fun. Tough, which means the same as difficult. It was a tough game. Through, which is a preposition like go through the door. Thorough, which means including every possible detail. A thorough report. So the second tendency that we're going to look at are homophones. Now homophones are 2 words that are spelled differently but pronounced the same. Now knowing that 2 words are pronounced the same can be useful for remembering them. Let's take a look at some very common examples of homophones. Write.
I'm gonna write Joey.
Is that right?
There.
Fine, let's say there was a moment.
There was.
There wasn't. Give me their names.
They're wanderers.
Steak.
For your information, Becky doesn't like steak. She likes paschetti. Spaghetti.
There's a lot at stake.
Meat.
People need meat to survive.
Nice to meet you.
Steel.
But also kind of made of wood and steel.
Joey, we know you steal our food.
Weather.
You're gonna want to take a look at the Weather Channel.
Did you just say weather, not Santa's real?
Bear.
Ladies, how much does a polar bear weigh?
You want me to crush that big box into a little ball with my bare hands?
Now, a lot of learners confuse this with beer, which is the drink, or even with beard, like this, or bird, the animal. So listen to those again, practice the pronunciation so that you make sure that you're not making this mistake. And then we also have some pronouns that have homophones, so be sure not to confuse these. Aisle, wheel, weed, whose, which. So the next tendency that we're going to look at is words that are often confused, that have very similar pronunciation, but are not homophones. Now, these even can confuse natives sometimes, so don't feel too bad if you've gotten tricked up by these. Breath, breathe. Coach, couch. Loose, lose. Word, world. So it's probably no news to you that English pronunciation can be extremely difficult, but it's super important if you want to be able to understand natives and speak clearly and confidently. And that is exactly why in our Fluent with Friends course, we guide you through the most common pronunciation and connected speech in American English with our intuitive and effective power learning guides just like this one. Do you want to give that a try? Well, you can get a free taste with our 3-part masterclass. Just click up here or down the description below to learn more and sign up, and we look forward to meeting you inside. Okay, so now we're going to look at some word stress change. Now, some words, when we add a suffix, the actual stress stays in the same syllable. So for example, danger, dangerous. But in other words, however, the stress actually changes when we add a suffix. So for example, commerce, commercial. Let's look at a few more examples of where this happens. Admire, admirable. Medicine, medicinal. Prefer, preferable. Agriculture, agricultural. Mystery, mysterious. Miracle, miraculous. Advantage, advantageous. Outrage, outrageous. Now, the fifth tendency that we're going to look at is the mispronunciation of suffixes. Now, as you probably know, there are tons of suffixes out there, and there are many that learners tend to mispronounce. So be sure to kind of identify these in your learning and practice them so you're not pronouncing them incorrectly. So we're going to look at 5 suffixes that are very commonly mispronounced. So the first one is the suffix ious, anxious, rebellious, laborious. Next, let's look at the suffix ous, courageous, miscellaneous, simultaneous. So the next 2 that we're going to look at are fool and able. Now, while these are actually also words, and so it might not seem so difficult, what tends to be tricky for learners is that these both have the dark L sound. Now, we looked before at the word world. This tends to be one of the most difficult ones for learners, and basically you'll hear this sound, which is very subtle, or you might not even hear it at all if you're not accustomed to it. It's a sound that occurs here in the back of the throat, so it's oh. Now, this is something that if you don't have in your language, you're going to need to practice it a lot to get it right. Let's take a look at these suffixes and you can start practicing right now. Careful, shameful, thoughtful, manageable, doable, noticeable. Now, the last suffix that we're going to look at is age. Now, this one is tricky because it is not pronounced like the word age. So listen carefully and make sure that you don't mispronounce this one. Mortgage, sabotage, marriage. Hey, are you following us on Instagram yet? Well, we have an exclusive and fun lesson for you that will help you to improve your pronunciation after you finish this video. Just head over to @reallife.english on Instagram, and while you're there, remember to follow us so you can get more fun and powerful lessons. So the next common mispronunciation we're going to look at is the schwa sound. Now, if you're not familiar with this, this is actually the most common sound in English, in any accent of English. In fact, 1 in every 3 vowel sounds is a schwa. Alright, so we're going to look at some scenes from Friends, and these are the words that we're going to see that all have the schwa sound. Now, pay attention to how common the schwa sound is and how many different spellings that it can take. Again, be sure to trust your ears over your eyes.
How desperate am I? Oh, good thing Chandler's not here. He always wins at this game. I just told my mom I'd cater a party for her. How come? Because I need the money. And I thought it'd be a great way to get rid of that last little smidgen of self-respect.
Come on, I think this is a good thing. I don't think Mom would have hired you if she didn't think you were good at what you do.
You don't have to stick up for her. She can't hear you.
Now, the schwa sound is the sound that you hear in most syllables that are not stressed. Let's take a look at 3 words for examples. Now, most learners would probably say these something like desperate, respect, chocolate. So first, let's take a look at the word desperate. Now, the stress falls on the first syllable, des, and the other 2 syllables we actually reduce and pronounce with that schwa sound. And the same thing happens with respect. Now, the first syllable that is not stressed has that schwa sound, and we give a strong vowel sound to the second part. So it's respect. Now, how about chocolate? Actually, a couple interesting things happen here. Now, the stress is on the first syllable, chalk, and the last syllable is unstressed. Now, what about the second syllable? We actually drop the second syllable, and this happens in many words in English. You've probably heard some, like how probably is usually pronounced probably. Interesting often becomes interesting, and it's pretty rare that you'll hear a native say comfortable. Usually we just say comfortable. All right, so tendency number 7 is minimal pairs. Now, a minimal pair is two words that differ in just one sound. This is like how in ship and sheep, we only have one different vowel sound there, and that's the E in sheep and the I in ship. Now, these are extremely useful to practice your pronunciation and listening, especially for those sounds that don't exist in your language. So if you do a Google search, you will find tons of lists of minimal pairs in English, but let's look at some examples right now. So we looked at sheep and ship. Let's look at some other minimal pairs with that E and I sound. Bin, bean. Chip, cheap. His, he's. It, eat. Sit, seat. And another one that natives tend to find really difficult is the difference between the A and A sound. Bat, but. Cat, cut. Began, begun. Hat, hut. Ran, run. Ankle, uncle. Back, buck. Now finally, we're going to look at just some random words that learners tend to find extremely difficult. So one of the first things we see is with numbers. Now, have you ever mispronounced 15 or 50, or just heard them and been confused whether someone was saying 15 or 50? Now, there's actually a really great trick to be able to pronounce these correctly and also understand them a lot easier, at least with American English. So first off, let's look at 13 and 30. Now, could you hear how I said these different? Now, 13, that has that true T sound, 13. But in 30, because that T is surrounded by vowel sounds, we actually change that to an American T, which sounds like a soft D. So it's not 30, it's 30. So we have 13, 30. And another one that you might find tricky is the number 20. Now this is because usually we don't say 20, we say 20. This is because we have an NT here. Now Americans will usually drop the T when we have an N and a T together. Now another one that learners tend to find very difficult is when we have an R sound and a dark L sound together in the same word. Now I'll give you 3 examples of this. The first one is squirrel, that's the little animal. Rural. And then one that we saw earlier, world. Now the next one I've seen tons of learners confuse is this and these. Now this is singular and these is plural. Now, because the first one has an I, learners often think that it's pronounced these, but that's why it's so important to trust your ears and not your eyes again. So it's this, singular, I, and these, plural, E. Now let's look at the word literally. Now, learners often mispronounce this one because it can actually have 2 pronunciations, and they're not what you might expect. So we usually don't say literally, we'll say literally with that American T we saw earlier, so it's literally, or we'll even reduce it so it becomes literally. So literally, literally. Now let's look at one with a tricky H, the word hierarchy. Now this is actually easier than it seems. If you probably saw it spelled, you would be really confused as to how you would possibly say that word. So you probably know the word high, like something is up high as opposed to low. And then if you want to say the comparative of that, higher, so it's very similar to that. So you'd say hierarchy, hierarchy. Something else that can be really confusing for learners is that we have many French words in English, but they're not pronounced like French usually. So a really great example of this that you probably would be very confused if you saw it written down as to how to say it is entrepreneur, entrepreneur. Schedule. Now this one in American English, we changed that D to a J sound. So instead of it being schedule, it's schedule. And if you're learning British English, again, this one would be pronounced differently. All right, I hope you've had a lot of fun learning these and that you feel a little bit more confident about speaking more clearly and more correctly. Now, the topic of mispronunciation is huge, and I know there still is a lot that we didn't cover. It can be really useful having a native coach who can help point these out to you. But really, don't let pronunciation fool you. There's so many resources out there that can help you to pronounce correctly. Usually any dictionary, or even if you just type a word into Google, you can find the correct pronunciation in American and British English. And I hope that this has inspired you really to use your ears over your eyes. If you continue using your eyes, you're going to have a lot more problems communicating. So one great tip with this is that when you learn a new word, first learn by listening before you even look at the spelling. And since we didn't cover all the words today, what do you think is the most difficult word to pronounce in English? Did we cover it today? If not, then why don't you comment it down below and maybe we can help you to pronounce it correctly. And if you want to take your American English pronunciation and comprehension to the next level, then I highly recommend you check out our Fluent with Friends course by signing up for that free 3-part masterclass. Now it's time to go beyond the classroom and live your English. Aw, yeah.